I'm so excited to be chairing the next session, which will be on a larger project we're running in our department, COPE, a comprehensive approach to enhance older adults' preparedness for extreme heat. And so the session will be run by the three of us. My name is Teresa. I'm an assistant professor in the department, and then we have Atia to my right-hand side, who's also a professor in gerontology, and then Victoria, who's a postdoc in this project. So Victoria and I will start, and then Atia will talk a little bit more about the part of the project that she is leading. And yeah, I'm just so excited. We're trying to, I know it's a long day, we try to make it fairly interactive, and then I'm just so excited that we're gonna be able to share some initial findings as well. And we're starting out with pop quiz. You thought you can just lean back and listen today, but actually we're gonna test your heat knowledge. So if you have a smartphone with you, you can scan the QR code, and it's gonna link you to a questionnaire that's gonna ask you 10 questions about heat. And just please, you can go through those 10 questions, click submit, and then it's going to tell you your score out of 10. And just take a note of that score. I'm going to ask you about that after. Oh, sorry, if you wanted the heat knowledge questionnaire, that's this one. Could you rescan the QR code? So after you're done, there's another QR code to scan, and then you can tell us about your result. You're going to assign yourself stars, gold stars. So give yourself as many gold stars as the points you've received. So if you had 3 points, you'll give yourself 3 gold stars. If you had 10 points, you're going to give yourself 10 gold stars. It is completely anonymous. Do not have ethics approval for this research.
I won't say where I am, but I didn't get 10 out of 10.
But if you got 10 out of 10, you could have said,
So we're just gonna wait for responses to trickle in, but we can already see, like there's some people who are, got all the gold stars. Some people had full points. I think when I first filled it out, I didn't get full points. Okay, so maybe I can tell you, maybe people are still adding scores. So right now, it seems like the most score is about 7 out of 10 among all of you. And that kind of lines up with our study. So we had 58 participants last summer. They were all aged 60 years and older. And on average, they had a score of around 6.5 out of 10. So I would say probably here the average is 7.9, so a little bit higher than the older adults in our sample, which is not surprising because a lot of us are researchers or actively engaged with the topic around climate change and coping with heat. So maybe we have a bit more knowledge in the room. And I just wanted to start the session off with getting us into the topic, getting us thinking about heat. So maybe, or actually now 8 is the most prevalent score. So I just wanted to talk to you, and maybe some people can voice a few ideas about, did any of the questions surprise you, and if so, why? How has your experience with heat changed over time? Any of the questions were kind of weird? Yeah.
And that the medication one, how you have to adjust it.
Yeah, to adjust the medication. Yeah, that was surprising. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a question about, it's a really hot day. Do you, keep taking medication as usual? Do you adjust your dose? Yeah, anything else? Yeah.
So the heat stroke is an emergency. It's not
Yes.
write it out.
Yes, exactly. There's one question in there that somebody has a heat stroke, what do you do? And then one of the answers would be, well, just simply give them water and have them rest versus calling the emergency. And that's it's an emergency situation. You have to call an ambulance right away. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'll just mention, and some of you may already know this, but I think it was back around the 1970s, something like that, and there was some sort of a significant or pseudo-significant executive with the automobile industry in Detroit, Michigan. And what he said was, when you think you have saturated the market with your message, the truth is you have just begun to break through to the public consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you so much. And we just used this as sort of an intro into the topic, right? The whole conference is on climate change, and specifically with this project. And in this session, we want to focus on heat as one of the big impacts that climate change has on the planet, right? Where in Canada, we know that the temperature is increasing twice as fast as the global average. Our summers are getting hotter. We have more frequent, severe, and prolonged heat waves or heat domes in the summer. And also just the number of days that you have each year where people are at risk for health complications, they are fairly high. Where now we have around 86 days per year that pose heat-related health risks. So on the graph on this slide, you see the average temperature increase, and then here the number of days, in I think it's 1981 to 1990, the current, and then projected into the future, where we can see how much that's going to increase in different areas around Canada. And I have another question. So if you're still in the Slido, it should have advanced. And I would like to know from you, if you think about the temperature throughout the year, right? Like it being hot is a risk to your health. It being cold, it is also a risk to your health, right? We have people passing away from freezing to death, sadly, especially in the downtown east side. So what do you think is the safest outdoor temperature in Vancouver that results in the fewest deaths? So think about the temperature in Celsius. What do you think is the safest temperature where the fewest people die on that day? 22, 18, 19, those are some answers I've heard. 18. So if you can go in and submit your response. Seems like most of you think that it is 18, so let's talk about that. And in fact, in places like Vancouver, right, where we traditionally have milder, more moderate climates, this is a little bit different than in areas that traditionally have hot climates, like Sao Paulo in Brazil. So here you can see on the y-axis, you see the relative risk, right, of health complications or of dying. And on the x-axis, you see the temperature. On the left-hand side, this is Sao Paulo in Brazil. On the right-hand side, it's Vancouver in Canada. And you were actually not that far off. So the safest outdoor temperature is 17 degrees. That's fairly low. You know, thinking about, well, already, look at how steep that curve rises, even from like 22, 23 onwards. So there's a huge increase in health risk once you reach those temperatures. Whereas if we look at countries like Brazil that traditionally, you know, have really hot weather, you actually don't see that much of an increase in mortality risk with the higher temperatures. We see it goes all the way up to 30, and even at 30, it's not as high as some of the lower temperatures. And that really, you know, talks about that so much around heat risk is also about we just haven't had the opportunities to build our homes, cities, or community support services with extreme heat in mind, right? Because it's a fairly recent hazard that has occurred, especially with respect to heat domes. And our health systems, and we're still learning how to respond to these events. So everyone, and especially people that are at risk, can stay safe and healthy. So this is really something we need to take seriously. So let's talk a little bit about who is most at risk. We do know that people who live alone with no one to check in is more at risk. Living on upper floors where hot air rises, south or west facing apartments that get a lot of sun through the windows. People who don't have any air conditioning or poor airflow inside the home. People who have limited mobility or challenges getting around. You know, you might not be able to go to a cooling center. People who have disabilities that affect communication or self-care. People who have a current illness or long-term chronic health condition that just makes them, from a physical standpoint, more vulnerable to the effects of heat or dehydration. People who are pregnant, and older age is also a risk factor. So especially individuals aged 65 years and older. And so why is age a risk factor? That's the question here, right? And why do we study this, especially in old age? So we do know that our bodies change with age. As we get older, we just can't handle the temperature as well as we used to due to several reasons. For example, we tend to sweat less, right? So it's harder to cool down. We have reduced blood flow to the skin. That's one of the ways our body regulates temperature, is to direct more blood flow to the skin. And that makes cooling less effective. Then there's also health conditions and medications, right, where a lot of older adults have chronic health conditions or take medications that affects the body's ability to stay cool or make it harder to drink enough fluids. People also have what I just talked about, mobility limitations, which can make it harder to get to a cooler place, like an air-conditioned room or a cooling center. It could be financial challenges, just not being able to afford air conditioning, to upgrade or amend or change your home. Social isolation, where maybe you don't have anybody, like a heat check buddy that checks in, because one of the symptoms of heat stroke or even heat exhaustion is actually cognitive confusion. So you might not be able to recognize the symptoms in yourself. So that can make it harder to access community support and get help during heat emergencies. But the good news is knowing your risks and planning ahead can make a big difference in staying safe. So the ideal body temperature, we know, is around 36.5 to 37 degrees. As I've mentioned, there's these two major pathways that we have to respond to heat, which is redirecting the blood flow to the skin and sweating. Those are the two big factors. And fatalities and injuries occur when this capacity to thermoregulate, to regulate temperature, is exceeded. So I have another question for you. Imagine it's the middle of a long, relentless summer heat wave, the kind where the air feels heavy the moment you wake up. And even the early morning offers no relief. By midday, the sun is blazing through the windows, turning your living space into a slow oven. Outside, the pavement shimmers, and inside, the temperature in your apartment has crept up to 31 degrees. At first, you try to tough it out, you open the windows, hoping for a breeze, but the air drifting in is just as warm, if not worse. A fan hums in the corner, pushing hot air that barely cools your skin. Your clothes cling to your body, and even simple tasks feel draining. You notice yourself getting a bit sluggish, maybe even irritable. The idea of cooking, working, or focusing becomes less appealing. So now it becomes a question of endurance. Do I just toughen this out, or comfort if you have an AC at home? And how long do you think you would wait to turn on the air conditioning for some relief? And I promise this is the last question I have, so if you could bring back out your phone and tell me, how long will you wait? Will you wait less than 10 minutes? Will you wait 10 to 30 minutes, 30 to 60 minutes, over an hour, or you would never turn on the AC for whatever reason? Okay, so most of you, it's 31 degrees, right? If you have an AC, why not turn it on? I think that's what I would do. If it's 31 degrees, I have to be working, I don't feel good, I would turn it on immediately. So what is incredibly surprising is there was this study done by colleagues, and it's published in the Journal of Building Engineering. I think this was a study in China. Older adults waited an average of 108 minutes at 31 degrees to turn on the AC. 108 minutes. Versus, they also had younger adults in their sample. Younger men waited an average of 39 minutes. Younger women waited an average of 80 minutes. Those numbers are so surprising. 108 minutes is almost 2 hours of suffering at 31 degrees before you turn on the AC. And these graphs just sort of amplify that point, where on the x-axis you have the temperature, on the y-axis the percentage of people that turned on the AC, where in younger adults you see, they really at maybe 29, 30 degrees, they all start turning on the AC, whereas for older adults, It's much later that they start turning it on, and overall the frequency of people who turn it on, if they have it, is also much lower. And this really makes us think, well, why is that? Like, why people, if they have AC, don't turn it on, right? So that's a question that then becomes psychosocial. And that's my background and the background of our project, as in, well, maybe people just, they don't sense their risk, right? They're underestimating how dangerous it is to them. It could be a pride in being tough or self-reliant. Well, I've just handled worse, like I can deal with this. It might be a preference of natural air over artificial cooling. It could be, oh, well, the AC gives me headaches, I don't like using it. It could be a fear of high energy bills, right? I just can't afford to turn it on. Or stress or guilt about wasting electricity, especially if climate change, is a topic that's important to you. So there's just so many reasons why people, even if they have the resources, might not use them. And this is exactly the types of questions we want to answer with our project. That's sort of the reason of why we're doing this. So the COPE project is an international multi-method research initiative aimed at understanding factors that support extreme heat preparedness in old adults. We have 3 facets to this project. One of them is COPE Daily, where for 10 days we equip people with all sorts of devices, with little temperature sensors that sense the outdoor temperature wherever they are. We give them a watch that also measures skin temperature. And then we also have people tell us about their experiences. And then we have COPE Engage, which Atia is leading, that identifies more of the community level factors, where we're doing focus groups, or they've done focus groups, and partner interviews. 23, 2 are still scheduled, but it will be 23 in total. And then we have COPE Co-Create, which we will also talk a little bit more about later, which will happen in the fall, where we're going to have more of a World Cafe style event together with an experience style event, more as in learning about or engaging with the topic with older adults and community partners that will come in the fall 2026. And the idea is to co-create an action plan and to identify important sticky points we need to work on as a community. This is COPE Daily, a bit of an outline of the project, where we have people come in for a baseline session, and then for 10 days at home, we want to see, okay, what's actually happening, right? Like, to have them in the lab and tell us about it is something else than actually observe what's going on in their day-to-day lives. So at home, what typically happens is at 9 a.m., they wake up, and then participants fill out a questionnaire, as in, how did you sleep last night? Did the heat affect how you were sleeping? How's your day looking like? Any goals for the day? What you want to do? Any fears or concerns about the day? And then we have another questionnaire at 2:30, where we ask them about coping strategies. Okay, what did you do? Did you open the windows? Did you close the blinds? How did the heat affect you? Did you have any symptoms of heat-related illness today? Or up until now. And then at 8 p.m. we ask the same type of questions, and then we also have a photo voice element, where throughout the day we ask people to take pictures of situations when they feel too hot, and also of pictures when they find relief from the heat. And then in the evening we ask participants to pick the 2 most meaningful photos and then tell us more about it by recording voice notes. And Victoria will play a couple of those voice notes to you later on. And then we just bring people back for an exit session. And with that, I'll hand it over to Victoria, who, very excited, is going to show you some hot off-the-press findings.
All right. Thank you, Teresa. So yeah, we've already been able to take an initial look at some of that data that we collected in the way that Teresa just explained. So I'm happy to share some first looks. So this might be a little hard to read for some of you because the text is quite small, but it's basically a plot showing those 3 different ways we measure temperature. So we measure people's wrist temperature with the watch, and then we have those 2 sensors, one that they keep in their sleeping space all the time, and one that they put on themselves and just wear throughout the day, so we get a sense of what kinds of conditions are they actually living through in their daily routines. And what you're seeing here is the green one is that sleep sensor, the one that senses the temperature as they sleep. The red one is the sensor that they wear on their person. And then the blue line is the one on their wrist, so their wrist temperature. And a few things to note here. So first being that you can see with the wrist temperature and the temperature sensor they wear on themselves that measures the temperature around them. They're both the lowest in the morning, as we would expect, and then they slowly rise through the day and never quite come down in the evening. And then at nighttime, once they take off those wrist and air sort of temperature devices, we have the sleep device, the sleep temperature one, that shows us that it's kind of starting off a little bit higher and then declining up until the early hours of the morning. So throughout that 24-day, we have the full picture, which is nice. The other thing to note here is that these temperatures are all well above 20. So the shaded areas, so the lines show the average values across all 58 people we have so far. And the shaded areas show us the variation in that, so the kind of minimum to maximum values, the range that we have in those as well. And you can see they don't really dip below 20, and that's well above that graph, that temperature Teresa showed us earlier, where 17 is really kind of what we want for unacclimatized Vancouverites like ourselves, right? So even within our sample of last summer, we're seeing that our participants are coping with heat. The next thing I want to show you is just a kind of sampling of some of that photo voice data that Teresa talked about. So as people went through the 10 days of the study, we asked them each day to take photos of spaces where they felt too hot or they found some relief from the heat. And at the end of each day in the evening, we asked them to upload one of each of those types of photos and tell us a bit more about what that experience was, what that space was, how it affected them. And I'll kind of let the participants speak for themselves. It's a nice aspect of this method is that, we can kind of put it in their own words. So I'll start with photo number 1 here, which is kind of this parking space.
This photo was taken when I was getting groceries. The pavement was kind of hot and muggy, and I was carrying groceries, so I was definitely too hot and sweating. This makes me feel clammy, sweaty, makes my face sweat, my glasses steam up, and uncomfortable, makes me feel heavy.
And then the next photo here is of someone's kind of dashboard in their car. And you can see it showing 28.5 degrees Celsius there in kind of the small print.
This picture was taken when I entered my car after work. It had been sitting outside since 6 o'clock in the morning till I got into it at 3:30 this afternoon, and that was the temperature when I first got into it. I had to open up my windows, air out my car, use the air conditioning. I was delaying getting started out of my car just because I had to wait for it to cool down.
And then this last photo here is one of the seawall, so a particularly kind of pavement-heavy section of the seawall.
As you can see in the picture, a lot of concrete and a kind of a black fence along the other side, on the south side. So, yeah, basically concrete and a fence along the side made it feel quite hot. And it was warm at that time of day as well. Basically it just made me feel warm. It was hot, or quite warm, and so I felt hot and a bit uncomfortable.
And I think something we can identify as a theme across all these photos is that these are very open spaces with mainly pavement. So not a lot of green, not a lot to take away the heat, no shade, right? And another thing to note is that these are all spaces that are, things like getting groceries, driving to and from work, going for a walk. These are all activities that we sort of do in our daily lives. They're very normal, right? So they're not really things you can opt in or out of, and, not necessarily that you'd want to, at least even, but they're also not adapted for hot temperatures, right? This is something that might be perfectly fine to do on a rainy day that we're used to, but when it gets hot, it's not something we necessarily have strategies for at hand to deal with.
This photo was taken.
Sorry.
This photo was taken at the
Oops. All right, and then we also asked people to talk about spaces that provide some relief from the heat, so things that help them cool down. And I'll just start with these first two, where the participants in this case were talking about their kind of complicated relationship with air conditioning.
This photo was taken at the Fleetwood Library. Although the air conditioning was cool in there, it was actually ended up being freezing, and I wasn't the only one that freezing, so I had to go outside to warm up before I went back in.
And then contrast that with this air conditioning experience.
It was really effective air conditioning, so when I walked in, it was just, oh, this was wonderful. It was a real relief from the heat.
So I like these two photos and these voice notes because I feel like they're very relatable. I think all of us have felt this at some point in the summer. But it also kind of gives us some insight into the finding Teresa mentioned earlier, right? About why don't people turn on air conditioning, or why would you use or not use it, right? And I think these kind of highlight the sort of love-hate relationship that we sometimes have with it. It's very effective and sometimes too effective, right? You might not like feeling too cold over a feeling of being warm, right? So perhaps one reason why many older adults hesitate to turn on the AC if they even have it. But on the other hand, it's really nice in contrast to those parking lots, you know, so you're in the parking lot to a grocery store, you're way too hot, but then you walk into the store and it provides that relief, right? And then this next one is of someone's tiled floor in their home.
Photo was taken on my bathroom floor, and it made it feel really cool. It cooled me down. I was in bare feet, and I was warm because I'd been outside, and it just made my whole body feel cold because it was cool and on the darkish side, so it was good.
So this one, this participant is actually onto something that research really backs up. So although it's quite simple, the experience of cooling down through your bare feet on a cool surface is very effective for cooling down your entire core temperature. One finding that came out recently is that submerging bare feet in water up to even 20 degrees, so not even super cold water or anything like that, that effectively cools down your entire body, more so than putting cool water on your hands or your arms. It's really the feet where you can get a lot of coolness from. And also very accessible to seniors from all kinds of walks of life, right? And I feel like this picture really illustrated that. And I'll just play one more.
I went for a walk in the forest, and it was cool and pleasant and soothing on the eye because it was so green, and I gorged on ripe salmon berries that I picked from the bushes and huckleberries also.
So another theme I just wanted to highlight with this last photo and voice note is that, you know, the benefit of green spaces is that, A, they provide relief from the heat, they have shade, there's a lot of moisture in those spaces, and it's very contrasting to those gray pavement photos that we saw earlier. I was talking to Teresa today about how I would love to make a collage of how most of the heat photos our participants took are very gray colored. In contrast to these relief photos, they're all very similar to this, a lot of green, a lot of gardens, a lot of patios, a lot of forest spaces, right? And while we have yet to do formal coding with these photos, I did already notice that several voice notes that accompany these kind of green outdoor spaces, they have a real calming benefit. So this gentleman noticed that it was, you know, nice on his eyes and relaxing. That's something we hear with a lot of our participants, is there's this sort of meditative coping aspect to it as well. Kind of beyond a behavior, there's also this kind of psychological coping that green spaces provide.
This photo was taken at the Fleetwood Library. Although
Photo was taken on my bathroom floor, and it made it I was warm because I'd been outside, and it just made my whole body feel cold because it was cool and on the darkish side. So
I'll use the arrow. There we go. Okay, So I'll talk about next steps. That's kind of where we are right now with our preliminary data. We're still definitely collecting data this summer, so we tried to do as much as we could in the few months of summer last summer, but now we're doing more. This spring, Cope Engage is conducting their final partner interviews, and then in the summer, Cope Daily will be completing our data collection and getting into Cope Drama, which is a really exciting way to kind of think about heat and people's experiences through dramatic performance. And then in the fall, we'll be doing the Co-Create workshop, which Teresa already touched on, and Atil will talk about a little bit more as well. Save the date, that's September 10th. We'd love to see everybody there. The whole goal there is to bring together stakeholders to kind of collectively create this action plan to help everyone stay safe during hot summers. And by spring of next year, hopefully this time next year, we're looking forward to sharing everything we've learned in a more final way. And with that, I'll pass it off to Atia.
So changing gear a little bit, and thanks to Teresa and Victoria to provide the overview about the project. So I'm going to now talk about the aspect of what did community partners do during extreme heat events, and how do older adults deal with services and resources out there? Because in Cope Daily, they've talked about how they manage it on their own. This is moving to how do they interact with the community. And I'm going to provide also, as they mentioned, that our data collection is almost over, but we're still ongoing, so this is going to be just some preliminary findings. So some background context. As you know, what happened? After the heat dome, people became quite aware, not just the older adults and others who actually were victims of this and also experienced it, but also the resources in the community and the people who were working in it, because we hadn't had something like this for a long period of time, and this was in 2021. And at that time, our public health officer of Canada, Dr. Teresa Tam, mentioned that climate change is the largest health threat facing people in Canada and around the world, and the time is now for collective action. And that sort of sets the background of what we have been doing. And also, as Teresa and Victoria have mentioned, limited attention has been paid to addressing older adults' needs while climate adaptation and planning and programming are going on. And it's not just Teresa and our keynote was also sort of talking about, Dr. Hawk has mentioned that. And also there is also limited knowledge, at least in British Columbia, about how do community partners work together, who are they, and what do they address, what barriers do they feel or experience as they go about this work, and about older adults' awareness about who is in the picture. So Cope Engage wanted to focus on that. So our major goal is investigate partners and providers' awareness of who is in this mixture for older adults, and also use it. How do older adults use the services available, as well as what barriers do they face, what do they think is working, and also our partners, what barriers do they face, or who they think are good collaborators in the process. So these are all related issues, and what we did is 2 research questions that guided us. One is from the older adults' perspective, that what do they know, what do they use, and I'm paraphrasing, but the actual research questions are there about extreme heat and how they manage. The Cope Daily goes very much into details about that. We have asked more about, okay, how are you coping, and how does outside resources help you with that coping issues, and what would you like better in that situation? And then we reached out to different community partners, and I'll talk about the categories of people we reached out to, and we are still collecting data on that. Hopefully we'll finish by May, to ask them about how are they addressing this issue, what kind of messaging do they do, what kind of programming are they providing, and then who do they collaborate with, who are they reaching, who do they want to reach, and what would be better for them. So in the community partners group, we tried to get a wide variety of people so that we can get a holistic perspective of who is involved. We know the usual players are, we know that the health authority is involved because it's a health issue, and then maybe the municipal government, but what we have found out, there are multiple groups, and one of the key groups is the community-based service sector, because they are the persons who are right there on the ground providing programming during heat events as well as before about prevention and raising awareness. And then there are also in academia very applied research centers who are working on these issues, raising awareness, advocacy. And then there are, of course, and we'll be hearing more from people, older adults as advocates here, who they are community partners too. So, and then one area that came out, and people have been talking about it at this conference, and also at the World Cafe we had yesterday, is about the built environment and what can housing providers do, or housing developers, or people in the industry, because that is an area where some of the things can be changed, especially for the indoor area. So these are people, so we went around and purposefully sampled from each category. We have completed 21 interviews in this category, and we have 2 more to do. We have multiple, and this is mainly done in the Metro Vancouver area, so we have multiple cities represented in this group, as well as both the health authorities that is serving Lower Mainland, that is Fraser and Vancouver Coastal Health, and we also had a provincial entity, which is BC Hydro, as some of you who live here know, they have been very integrally involved in after the heat dome with provision of air conditioning, and then some climate-related, very applied centers where people are working very on the ground at the community level with people. And of course, we also interviewed several housing providers who are working, specifically housing providers who are working at the affordable housing arena, people who are in the nonprofit, housing providers providing below market rate housing for older adults, rental housing. And for older adults also, we purposefully targeted older adults who are living in these kind of housing, below market rate rental housing. As we know, if you are older adult and if you have money and you have resources and support, maybe you have a bit better chance than if you don't. And so we have found, because my area of other research is looking at affordable housing, where we have found that a lot of these barriers come because if they're living in below market rate affordable housing, they have the least amount rental housing, the least amount of capacity to change things. Even if their landlords are trying to provide provisions, it is hard. And people over here, I see a lot of people from the community-based service sector who will agree with me that these are issues that we are always facing. And so we purposefully targeted 4 sites in this below market rate kind of housing, where there are housing organizations that have multiple housing that they manage, anywhere between 20 to 50 housing sites, and went to those housing sites to do the actual focus groups. And the other thing was interesting is, given, if those of you who are from here, it's not a new information, but who are from other places, Metro Vancouver is very multicultural and diverse. And many of our elders are from other ethnic groups. They are not English speaking only. Their mother tongue might be others. So we tried to target and have bilingual RAs to do some focus group with, these are people often we say can't reach. So we intentionally, even in these focus groups, targeted people who are not, their native language wasn't English. Some of them could speak English, but some couldn't. So we were very fortunate to have bilingual RAs. So that is why you will see when I show the demographics that we got a wide variety. So this was very purposefully done to get this picture, because COPE Daily is giving us a wide variety of older adults, but we wanted to focus on people who might have least resources and access in the community. And then we also worked through one senior center to recruit, but we wanted to mainly focus on those housing. So this is what is just a very quick demographic. So our range of people who participated in the focus group were in the range of 62 to 87 in age. And as you can see that we have more ethnic minority in the group than Caucasian or white older adults, and that was intentionally done. And we, as Metro Vancouver has a huge Chinese, Mandarin, and Cantonese speaking population, so we did a couple of focus groups just with older adults. In that category, we have South Asians and other people represented in this. And then gender distribution often, as happens in many of the studies we have done, more women show up than men, so that is the distribution of the, we had 33 in total participants in these 5 focus groups. And so these are some of the preliminary findings that we have been discovering by coding. These are all qualitative focus group interview questions. And I'm going to show quotes from one, but these are the 4 that we have, and I'm hoping that we'll fine-tune and find a few more, but currently what is coming out is the balance of perception and anticipation of risk with functional independence. So what do they, are they aware of, and how do they know? And some of the things, this sort of mimics what COPE Daily has found, that often the awareness is not there, or the risk perception, and then their own knowledge about what can I cope within this situation. And then also adaptive practices. So even if we are asking about what resources you are looking out for, they also talked about what practices do they engage in, and how much of it is personal, and how much is that using resources out there. And some of the things that the photo voice showed about, like, cooling yourself physically in different ways was also mentioned. And then planning ahead. So that was another thing, that if you are going to use resources or you're going to use other things, planning ahead a day when a day is hot. And how do you act within that? That came out. The one that I'm going to focus on with a few quotes is what came out in multiple focus groups, that not all one size fits all. Each of us, even if we are living in very similar housing and others, different things work for us. And diverse solutions of cooling and comfort, we need to know about those resources and get access to them. And then another thing that was quite prevalent, and at the yesterday's World Cafe also this came out, is the navigating trust. With so much information out there, which source should we trust, and where should we go? And given social media and all kinds of things, and some of the things that was mentioned also, the misinformation, I guess today somebody, that what should we trust? So that came out within the group. So this is one that I'm going to focus on, is that not one size fits all. And here, one of focus group participants says, imagine an 80 or 81-year-old woman who physically and mentally are down because it's hot outside, and all this information, they start going on, they're writing a thesis so they've talked, and it's not just one person, multiple persons said that we've bombarded with all this. They're good, they're trying to be helpful, but it's too much information. And they start going in, and they don't need that. When you are passing on information to a senior, it should be just point from, tell us what is the specific things I need to know, not this whole list of things you are providing, and I have to find out what is most important when I'm going through a heat event. And then another focus group participant said, it's very hot, and this is coming to the built environment side, and that was also mentioned, which like south-facing, cross-ventilation, those kinds of things. It's very hot on the west side. It's not as hot on the south side and the east side. of the house. So it is not the same for everyone. So even in this room, and that was the discussion, that somebody might say, oh, in my unit, I am not so bad in this hot situation. The other will say, but I live on the south side. So even those things, so if you are making some mitigation strategy or you are asking your tenants and others to do it, also know where they're living in the building and what kind of resources they need. Those are things to be aware of. So these are some of the preliminary findings from what we are finding from our community partners. And as I said, there is a wide variety of people we targeted to get this information. And one of the things that they did highlight is that after the 2021 heat dome, there was more collaborative efforts going on, but there is still that silo. So collaborative networks, sharing knowledge, and then sort of redistributing resources in the limited resource situation. For heat preparedness, they seem to see a pattern that is working. And also they highlighted from different organizations that co-learning, that one group knows certain information and then the other groups comes in, the capacity, and it's helped with capacity building. So this is not all negative, but there are positive things that has happened and they want to build on it. But there also, as we all know, and people in the service sector, community-based service sector, and the health authority and municipal governments, there's strained resources. So there is always competing for the same small amount of resources out there, and limitations and organizational challenges, the hierarchy there, what is mandated by an organization. If it's not a mandate, can you do it, though you see it's a problem issue. So that has come out quite often. And then the one that I'm going to highlight with a few quotes is from planning to practice. So we are planning it, how do we practice this while we are trying to get the resources out to older adults and other citizens, and institutional responses to heat. So this is the interesting thing from the housing provider, because some of you may be familiar here that the government, through different BC Hydro and other mechanisms, they provide incentives for energy efficiency and some heat preparedness, and also building construction. So this is from one of the housing providers we interviewed, is to accelerate our journey towards net zero emissions. So they're linking this heat preparedness with net zero, actually means we either retrofit buildings, and in those new buildings there would be maybe not air conditioning, but some form of mechanical cooling and something like heat pumps, and would create an environment where on a 30-degree day, it may be 22 or 23 in your unit. So this will be reached gradually. This is a new thing because net zero is an important thing that's happening here. But this is the awareness in the housing provider. And this was a nonprofit housing provider that we interviewed. And it was interesting also, and anecdotally, I want to say that we were able to do a focus group with people, older adults living in this housing provider's housing. And in the same focus group, people who were living in the older housing managed by this group and the newly retrofitted or newly developed with passive cooling were at the same focus group. And it was interesting to hear, one was saying that same management, that it is very hot in my building. I cannot stay in my room. I have to find somewhere to go. There might be a cooling room. The other one was saying, I'm very comfortable in my unit. And then they got discussion. And that was just anecdotal information that in the same focus group, same support, same kind of low income or below market rate housing, but just a different design. And it was inspirational to hear that. And then this was from the health authority, one of the health authorities. But every year we have a kind of summer readiness survey. As we have summer, so that we have summer readiness workshops for NGOs. And this is what they were saying, that they really developed and revamped this after the heat dome, is to have that ready and work with NGOs who are going to actually deliver the program, so they keep doing it. I see Anur from New West nodding his head, and I guess you can talk to people in the room to know about this part. And then this was from a city planner. The city's recent work, and this is now going to what Victoria's picture showed, that people go to green spaces and they go there for shading, and this is coming from the planning perspective. The city's recent work to renew its urban tree strategy, there were some mapping done of coverage and then revised guidelines for appropriate foliage. Of course, that's just the starting point as our climate is changing. So the cities are thinking about how do you, even when they're doing tree planning or other things, they're thinking about climate issues while they're progressing with that. So wrapping up, I have just a couple more slides. So these were some things that are preliminary themes that have some overlap across for older. I'm not going to read all of them. The one that stood out was the needs unmet, disconnect between service and lived experience. Both groups said it from their perspective. And this is just a couple of quotes in that category. In the Health Authority said, and then also, there's a lot of people that don't want checks. Because one of the things that's mentioned, why can't we have checks out there for, what has happened? I don't know what this is. It timed out?
Oh, okay.
Anyway, I can read it out even if you, it's all writing, it's no fun pictures or anything. I will just read out that section. Sorry about that. As Victoria mentioned, technical difficulties always happen, no matter what. We have been doing this for so many years, and we still get it. The Health Authority, so I always am old-fashioned. I always have a paper copy with me. And then also, there are lots of people that don't want checks and don't want anyone calling them. Even if they might need support, right? And so you have to balance that independence with security and safety. You can't just say that, yes, we'll just go and knock on everybody's door and ask them all the time. So you have to have that balance, that sometimes there's a lack of awareness. So they then talked about, here it is back again. So to work with that you have to have that awareness raising through the community organizations, through the health, before you can do something like that. And you also have to give people the right to their own agency and their own privacy and independence. And then one focus group participant, so one was from the Health Authority or one of the partners' side, and the other was at the library. And now we were talking about, as most of you know who are here, we have cooling centers now that were established. Some now are in community centers, some are in standalone places, some are in libraries, and then some housing have cooling rooms. So at the library, at the city, they posted signs that said cooling area at here, but you are in the heat, and this is another thing that was a recurrent thing. You have to get to the library, so how do you get there? Sometimes there's not enough transportation. Our transit system maybe comes every half an hour, 20 minutes. You have to walk. Again, the pavement, the hot pavement thing is an issue. You stand at a bus stop that doesn't have any shelter. Why would you do that in a very hot situation? And then the heat to get to the library, and then you are in the heat to come back. So you go to the library, you sit there, and then you come back. So you're doing it in and out. So it doesn't help unless you know you're going, you've got somebody to drive you there, drop you off, but that's not the case for everybody. Most people don't have that support. The other thing was about other cooling centers where they would go, but there was nothing to do. Library, at least they could read or do something. They don't want to go and spend a whole day at a center with nothing to do. You just go there, what do you do? Sit there? I'd rather stay at my home and do my stuff. And so that came out quite often. And just this is the last slide for the findings, and then we'll wrap up about what's coming next. So older adults, one size, as I said, doesn't fit. We talked about it. Community partners, the planning to practice, and the needs unmet was where they overlapped. So what's next was mentioned a little bit by, or quite a bit by Teresa and Victoria, as that our co-create workshop is going to happen, where we are bringing all the community partners. Hopefully, they will all show up. We are going to invite the community partners we have interviewed, but beyond that, more than that, the others who are out there to come to this co-creation workshop to discuss this from the different angles, because each brings their own expertise and own experiences with older adults, as well as persons with lived experience. So our focus group participants, as well as the COPE Daily participants and others who have older adults who are doing advocacy work around these issues, will all be brought together at this co-create workshop to talk about and come up with some action plans and solutions. But the co-create, the day that we are doing co-create is beyond that. Also, we have experience sessions where people get to interact and learn about heating issues, hot days, and then also our ultimate goal is that it will narrow the gap between needs and actual services and programs, as well as have some action plans of moving collaboratively together. And as Teresa and Victoria mentioned, COPE Daily is still ongoing, and we are still recruiting for that. COPE Engage, fortunately, we have already recruited everybody we wanted to target. And then also the COPE Drama is still looking for some participants. So if you know of anybody, or if you are a person you think you would qualify, please get in touch with that email that is provided there, copestudy@sfuca. And this is a QR code if you want to get in touch with us. We are always welcome people to come and ask questions and collaborate with us. Thank you.
And I think
We have time for some questions. Sarah's got a microphone.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Mohammed, and I'm postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Gerontology. And thank you, Teresa, Victoria, and Atia for your presentation. I have been working on climate equity topic for it's almost 4 years. And I have a question about the work that you are doing based on the framework that at the beginning, Gary mentioned it. It's three component framework: exposure, sensitivity, and the coping capacity. So what I'm thinking of is that when recruiting a participant for your project, the multi-layer nature of this topic should be considered. Like, for example, if it's about exposure, neighborhood by neighborhood, the exposure could be different for people. If it's about sensitivity, their needs of different people. If it's, for example, for older adult, their cultural background, socioeconomic status, housing, all these things could be different. And also for coping strategies, where they live, what resources, services they access. So from those participants that you have been working with so far, I want to know a little bit more about their characteristics, where they live, what were their exactly sensitivities, and what resources and services they have access to. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Victoria was like, yes, let me tell you about our fantastic work, which she, that's mostly due to her
So I worked very hard
work.
to make sure that we reached people from a lot of different areas that are tapping into all the things you just mentioned. So but something we did that wasn't reflected in these slides is we actually traveled to people. So we went to Surrey, we went to Chilliwack, we went to Burnaby, we went to White Rock. We went to a lot of different communities, and we tried to be very flexible with people and tried to make participation very easy for them, as much as this intensive kind of protocol could be. So, one example is someone who was a caregiver to his mother with dementia. They lived in an apartment facing the sun all afternoon in Surrey. He was only able to participate for a certain time, 10 days in the summer. That just worked for him. We made it happen. So we tried very hard to make this happen for people who had mobility issues, who were on different medications, who had were suffering with post-stroke ramifications. Like I mentioned, the rural versus kind of more urban areas, places like Vancouver, where, arguably in coastal health, you have a few more cooling centers and resources than somewhere where maybe transport is more difficult, like Surrey or Chilliwack. So we made a lot of effort to touch on the things you just mentioned. So even though we didn't talk about it today and we didn't bring up those numbers, I'm quite proud of the diversity we have in our sample.
Yeah, and that's so important, right? To also assess people, all these 3 points you've mentioned, right? Exposure, so we measure the actual temperature that people are exposed to, and then sensitivity, right? We ask people about their health conditions, we ask people about medications that they're taking, we do ask about resources in terms of financial resources, in terms of social support, so we have people fill out very long background questionnaires, which, that information is so crucial because all these 3 layers really determine your coping.
Yeah, and we also did try to make that accessible where, if the online survey link didn't work for you, you can have paper. If you don't have a phone, it's okay. We have iPhones with data plans. Like, you've never used a phone before. We spend an hour talking about it in the session, right? So we tried to kind of, make sure we get these people who are maybe a little bit more isolated or a little bit less likely to usually participate or access these resources.
Agnes Jackman. Was me? Okay. So your question on AC use made me laugh because I moved into a southwest-facing apartment with lots of windows 3 years ago, and at the encouragement of my family, I got an AC unit. I put it on once last summer. But the thing that I'm wondering about is I'm just wondering how much risk our Canadian snowbirds put themselves at when they go traveling, finding the sun during the winter months, And I've thought about this before too, because there they are going from in extremes of weather. So I'm wondering if there's ever been any study done on Canadian snowbirds as to just how they're doing when they go to areas that are very different than what they're used to. The other thing I wonder about, you pointed out is that you identified the ethnicity of a lot of seniors and, a lot of people. And I'm just wondering if all those people sort of skew your data if they're coming from countries that were extremely hot to up here. I don't know, maybe they reacclimatize or something, and so they start being more sensitive the longer they're up here, but I'm just wondering if that had an effect on your data.
I wish, we all don't have medical training, so I feel like my expertise in giving those responses is a little bit limited. But I think, part of what we're doing this study is to find answers to these questions. The first question about snowbirds, I can definitely see that that's a lot of strain on your body, right? Where you have the long period in the summer and then you don't even have that cooling phase. But here we have fairly moderate climate in the winter, right? And you don't have that phase for your body to recover to then go back and cope with heat in the summer.
To add to that, there's a productive line of research where they're trying to find out interventions to help people safely climatize, right? Because you don't necessarily want to go from an air-conditioned place and then right into the heat, right? Because that's a bit shocking. And so there's a lot of research out there of, how do we slowly expose people to heat? What's a safe way to do that for people who are vulnerable or who have kind of like compromised thermoregulation, right, with their bodies? So they're working on it. They're trying to figure out those answers because I think that would help a lot of people to know. I don't know if people specifically look at snowbirds. I haven't seen that, but it's an interesting point, right? Because it is extremes.
But there is inoculation around heat, so that does work. Like repeated, limited exposure can help your body adapt.
So that's what I mean by acclimatation, right? Is kind of repeatedly exposing yourself slowly to higher temperatures. And I mean, just lately we had our first kind of hot days, and I think that reflects in the research. It's what I felt is those first hot days in the spring are the hardest because we're not used to it, right?
So you're not going to recommend that they take vitamin D and stay home?
I mean, we interestingly had some participants who lived in Lower Mainland but actually go to Osoyoos a lot in the summer, where it's even hotter, right? So, people behave different ways.
Hi, I'm Sherry. I'm with Mosaic, and I'm kind of curious. I wonder if the BC Hydro or other energy sector providers were also interviewed, and curious what they say. So understanding AC has been the strategy to be offered for combating against the heat, and yet AC is one of the most energy wasting at the time. I lived in other really hot areas that are also dry, and so they used air cooling. And that actually we're talking about transitioning, so your body adapts better in that way, and it's less burn on the earth. But I actually kind of am curious, what were the energy sector responding to this?
Yes, so
thank you.
I just did the BC Hydro interview yesterday, so I have to we just did that, so not the day before yesterday, so I can give a very, what I was hearing, we haven't even processed that information. But in general, they are aware that, air conditioning is just a solution, one solution. It was mandated because what made BC Hydro take on this program, the 22-23, right after heat dome, is BC Hydro had the technical people to install things. They were doing it for cooling, and so they were the agency targeted. Okay, we have air conditioning to give, and BC, it came from the health authority provincially, and BC Hydro, you have the people who can do it, go and install. So they were given, this is not part of their mandate. Their mandate is more like the heating side of things, not the cooling. But they took it on, given that they had, so they did it, and it was open the first year to a lot of people, and then now it has been limited because the funding has been reduced. But the person we interviewed at BC Hydro, who's in charge of the air conditioning program, mentioned that air conditioning is just one solution. It has to be from the building industry, from other things, and passive cooling, the heat, all of those, shading outside. Air conditioning cannot solve it, and it's such a small drop in the bucket. And they said that even if we do install air conditioning, we cannot guarantee the person will use it, because a lot of it is also affordability and exposure, or thinking, as some of the things Victoria mentioned, is that you may have air conditioning, but you may not use it. And you think that I can tough it through. And because we also interviewed older adults that were from an ethnic group who had come from a more maybe hot climate, who had moved at an older age here, they said, we have toughed it through in my country. I'm not going to do it here, even if I've been given the air conditioning. So those are all that's the social and psychological and other aspects that play beyond just having an air conditioner, and will you use it? And it's not the most cost effective. So the hydro company is aware of all of those issues, but they are given that responsibility, they have to do it, and they are the ones that were able to do it. So that's the situation.
Hi, my name is Monica Deng. I'm a community organizer. I work with the City of New Westminster. My question is this. There is a lot of seniors in the old building. They don't want to go out to go to cooler place, and the air conditioner they give, the government give it to them. They said it's not cooling place down, and they need solution. How I can help, because they asked me yesterday how we can gonna help, because I hang them fan for cooling places, and they told me, we cannot go there, but give us a solution. Maybe I'm home, what can I do? They said, don't open the window and don't do this. How can I help them in this situation?
We actually, if you go to our homepage, we've developed a resource booklet, and some of those are also, like low-cost, effective solutions. We even have like some fun tips on what to do, especially to put clothes in the freezer, for example, or towels in the freezer that you can then take out. Foot immersion, as Victoria said, is huge, where even up to 20 degrees, if you place your feet in water, that will really, really help you cool down your body temperature. I think we talk about putting fans, not so much as using fans to blow air at you, but using fans to get air from colder areas to warmer areas, right? So at night, put the fan into the window so it blows the cold air inside. So yeah, but get in touch with us. We have a little resource booklet that you could share with the people you work with. Yeah.
And most probably our resource booklet also has that sometimes our community organizations can get cooling kits. They're distributed, and those give you very practical tips of how to cool yourself with limited resources in your home. And the kit may have some things like a pack that you can put in the freezer that can help. So those kinds of things are out there because, as you said, many people don't want to go out of their house. They want to stay there. But should they open the window or not? And the other thing that is makes it hard is that if it's heat plus smoke, is that if you open the window with smoke, open the window to get cool air, but then smoke comes in and aggravates. So often the window opening is not a solution.
Yeah, but I know we're out of time. But if you find us today or tomorrow, there were a lot of other hands up. So, yeah.
Fascinating talk. Thank you very much. And Atiya, I'm glad you mentioned the smoke because I actually had a question about that because you had a lot of other interactions of heat plus pre-existing chronic illnesses, medication use, et cetera. And I was thinking to myself, in this area, smoke is a huge problem, especially in the Okanagan and fires. So that particular environmental interaction, I think, is going to be quite remarkable. It might be partly beyond the scope of your study, but certainly something we can talk about during the conference. On behalf of